Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and the guest this evening is Dominic Copeland, one of the volunteers who is willing to take over the position vacated by the 6th Ward City Councilor, John Frates. Welcome, Dominic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good, George, and thank you for having me here. I'm honored to be here.
So as I was thinking about doing an introduction, I couldn't resist that, if Scott Hausman had been the one to retire, I could have been a contender.
There you go. Would have been lucky to have you.
I don't think I made it again. But anyway, I couldn't resist for the old days of on the waterfront. But anyway, so I'd like to start off these sessions we've been having with several of the city councilors and citizens at large on what's the state of the city. So what's your impression of how good is the city, or how bad is it, or where do you think it is?
Well, I think the city it's in a good position potentially. There's going to be challenges that are coming up, of course. One of them is going to be the budget for next year. We're looking at a $4 million windfall, so we have to look at how we're going to make up that portion of revenues. But also there's, to me, my mindset is always in any challenges, there's always great opportunities as well. So when we look at, nationally where we're headed as a country, you look at the different situations we're having as far as when it comes to racial inequity. I think here in Beverly, we're growing racially, and we're trying to confront those different things that are facing us. I've been here for over 12 years, so I know some of the things that we have ahead of us and some of the things that have already been in progress that we're kind of not meeting the grade on so far. So there's great opportunity to me for us to grow and become the Beverly that we really want to be going forward. So I think the state of our union overall is one where we're in a very good position, but what we do now is going to really determine what happens next, whether we falter or whether we rise. So again, it's going to be up to us as individuals and citizens, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Well, we got a mixed situation in the city. There's a lot of things going on. There's a charter commission that's going to be meeting sometime in the near future to reconsider how do we govern ourselves, whether we stay with a strong mayor, relatively weak city council, do we go back to the old days of a stronger city council and a relatively weaker mayor, or do we consider something like some of our neighbors are doing, like Danvers having a city manager? So that's one of the big problems that's coming up. What do we do next? And then there's also the Plan Beverly. So with those two things in the works, is there any opportunity that you can think of to, how do we move in some new direction based on what they're planning?
Yeah, each one of those represents an interesting option. So I'll address Plan Beverly first. With Plan Beverly, I think one of the things that we have to consider is eventually just building won't be enough to bring in the revenues that we want. So we're building so that we can bring in more people, so that we have a larger tax basis. At some point, just like every city does, you'll find yourself getting in trouble that way. So we have to really diversify our streams of revenue. So if we don't do that, I feel we're going to end up having a lot of maybe downtown space that's not fully utilized, or a lot of apartment complexes and condo complexes that we might not be able to rent out. And we definitely don't want to find ourselves in that situation. As far as whether we want to move forward in a different direction with town manager or the city council having more authority, I think to this point, I'd have to have more understanding of the benefits of each one of those compared to what we have now. I think at this point, what the mayors have been doing, it hasn't been a bad job. I think, especially given what they've been facing, I think the current mayor Cahill, I think he's been doing a lot to try to diversify and bring more voices to the table to try to help in that decision-making process. So I see him as naturally trying to increase the say of the people in the city council as well. So I do think you do need to have a strong city council, but not to the degree that it hinders the process. You know, we want it to grow the process instead of hinder what we're trying to accomplish here, if that makes sense.
Well, the issue I think comes down to the one that's been kicking around is an article in today's Salem News by Dave Manzi, where he's criticizing the expenses of the city and the increase in the taxes, and that every tax increase is the maximum allowed, plus everything they can scrounge out of growth and everything. So we're looking at a minimum of 2.5% tax increase, plus another couple of percent. So it's talking 3-4% year after year,
Yes.
kind of thing. And as you're starting to indicate that maybe that's not going to be enough money. So how do we control the spending, which is the only other thing we can do? If you haven't got the revenue, you can't spend it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's well, for me, it's a couple different things that we can possibly do. One of them is we have a lot of, to me, it's kind of troubling because we have a lot of companies that come here to build. And if you look over at Linfield, when they built the Linfield Market, part of the process in order for the companies to come in and do that, they had to also give money for them to build field complexes, all turf field over at the high school there. So they have a bunch of football fields, they have a bunch of baseball fields, everything else. And now those fields also become revenue for the city because now they're hosting tournaments and other things on those fields because they can. So to me, we have a lot of companies that come in, they build within the city, but you have to do more than build within the city. You have to be part of the city. And so I feel like there's untapped potential there. Because when you come into the city, there's also an obligation to be a part of the process, to be a part of the city, you know, for the things that we need. So I think that's something that we could have done and can do a lot better going forward. And then,
so this is what you're thinking of in terms of other revenue sources besides just real estate tax.
correct. Yeah. Besides just real estate tax, I mean, no one likes to pay more taxes. Some people call this Taxachusetts instead of Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, that goes way back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely never want to see more taxes. And at some point, you have to take the burden off the people of the city. You can't just keep piling on more and more and more. And like I said before, we can't just keep adding more houses so that we can bring in more people to tax. We have to find other revenues. And as I was pointing to, you know, we have plenty of Beverly's in a great location in comparison with New Hampshire, North Shore, South Shore, and everywhere else. So we'd be able to host many events that would bring people who come into our city for a weekend or daily basis, whatever it might be. They're spending their money and then they're leaving. You know, they're not necessarily staying here and just adding to the population.
Well, that brings up a different kind of issue. I've had a couple of discussions with Elliot Margolis, one of my co-hosts, that he would like to have somebody build a replica of the Hannah and advertise Beverly as the home of the U.S. Navy and expand on the tourist opportunities. And his famous comment is, Beverly is the place you go through on your way from Salem to Gloucester. And nobody stops, and as you're pointing out, they don't spend much money here unless they have to fill up a gas tank. So I guess what I'm hearing you saying is you're interested in expanding the opportunities for some sort of attraction to keep the tourists slowing down going through town.
Yeah, exactly. We have to, you know, have a way of bringing in, for example, there's, you know, my children play basketball, football, and so forth. And there's many cities outside of Beverly, up in New Hampshire and other places that host major tournaments where people come in and they're spending money. You know, that becomes part of their tourist attraction. So we definitely have to have more ways of having people come into the city to spend their money without, say, adding to the population. Because of Beverly, like you said, it's just a place you drive through from. I mean, most people, to be honest, when you say you live in Beverly, you have to say it's right by Salem in order for them to know where
Exactly, yeah, just north of Salem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be the way. Beverly, to me, is a great enough city on its own, where we should be able to hold our own and say, yeah, we're from Beverly, Massachusetts. And people can say, I know exactly where that is. I've been there. I spent money there. I spent time there. Great shops, great stores, great community.
Well, if you're talking about attractions and tournaments, we've got a magnificent golf course owned by the city that it's either losing money or we're going into deep debt trying to get it up to snuff so that it would be an attractive place. I think, as Dave Mancy pointed out today, they're spending like $5 million upgrading the facilities. And I can remember years back, there was a discussion of, well, we got to get that second floor of the clubhouse handicap accessible. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense as a wedding venture where you have a party after the big ceremony or any other major attraction like that. So at what point does the city finally say, hey, we got to make this really work, and it's an opportunity to make some money that, as you point out, doesn't involve more people?
Yes.
So how does the city council make something like this happen? How was you, as a city councilor, become the driving force for something like this?
Yes. Well, George, that's a great question. And actually, I've always been involved in education and sales and business development as well. So what you're talking about specifically, many things that I've done, developing new streams of revenue sources for corporations, also the sales aspect of reaching out, developing those relationships where you can bring people into those venues to start utilizing that space. So I think as part of the city council, that would be one of my main drivers. Even on I'm part of the task force for racial equity as well. And we just had our first meeting. And that was one of my driving factors that I talked about when they said, what should we focus on? And I said, even for minorities, we need to focus on the economic well-being and growth. Until we do that, we can't create that equity that we want. And the same as within the city, like you're talking about, if we don't utilize the spaces that we already have and put those to work for us, then we're just dumping money in that we'll never see a return on. Yeah. And that simply is not acceptable. And I think, especially part of the city council, we need to be looking at that closely and then taking the steps, but also have the experience to actually do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about a stronger city council than what we've got right now. And the other issue is you're bringing up is essentially the Beverly Golf and Tennis is the white elephant. It was a gift when the shoe shut down, and it's just cost us nothing but money ever since. And we're hardly getting any revenue out of it. I think it's $300,000, maybe $400,000 a year, and we're pouring in more than that. And the other issue that I think that needs to be explored is, yeah, if we bring in more people, they're liable to get married and they're liable to have kids. And right now it costs the city about $12,000, $13,000 a year to educate a kid. And a condo isn't paying that kind of real estate tax. So there again, it's one of these white elephant kinds of things that, hey, it sounds great, but it's costing us more money than we're getting out of it. So I think there's a fallacy in we'll build some condos and we'll bring in some people who will collect a lot of real estate tax. But the downside is they're liable to have kids that vote up the school.
Yeah, I think there's always many different things that you have to look at. Is, when times are good, we think about, okay, let's just build more condos and bring in people. But what happens when times aren't good? What is that going to look like? If you look just across the train station that runs from here to North Station in Boston, and you look at all the cities along there from Chelsea up to Beverly, and even beyond if you go up to Gloucester and so forth. If you look at it, there's maybe a few cities that are doing very well, thriving, from Swampscott to Beverly, maybe Gloucester here and there. But for the most part, what you're saying is what a lot of those cities have tried to do in the first place. Let's build up, let's bring in more people, we'll have a better tax base. And that simply hasn't been successful. And I don't think it will be going forward. So that's why I really emphasize we have to, instead of just bringing in more people, we have to use our natural resources. One, like you're talking about the golf club, we have to get that to where it's actually profitable for us. If we can't, then we have to look at a different strategy. Then two, we also have to look at, instead of just bringing in more people, how can we diversify that and develop other streams of revenue that actually help to bring money into the budget instead of take away from it. It's like you said, the hidden things that people don't think about. We're bringing in more people. You think, oh, they're just all single. At some point, they're not going to be. They're going to have kids. And can the city support that? And that's what I'm looking at from right here to down the road. I don't think that we can support that. And we're going to find ourselves in trouble if we don't do something about it now.
Yeah,
So
we can build all these condos, and we're essentially baiting the trap ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And
the money right now looks good, but eventually it won't be enough.
And the other one that bothers me about the tourist kind of industry is they're not the highest paying jobs around. And the issue comes down to, we got a nice, vibrant community. That's nice. Where do these people live? And if we're building nothing but condos and very expensive apartments, what about the rest of the people? And I think you're getting into some of these equity issues. That's one I think that is totally just lost by the wayside, that there are people around who have problems already. And it's an economic problem. And how do we balance out the city?
Yes. And that's what, one of the things I said when I first was looking at moving from, we lived in Middleton, and I was working in Beverly, and we were looking to move into something that was more of a community. And I brought my family into Beverly, and we ran into, someone I lovingly call an old timer, someone that's lived in Beverly all their life, and that's all they knew. So, and I asked him, can you tell me something about Beverly? We're thinking about moving here. And he said, well, Beverly's a place that if you're born here, you die here. If you're from here, you won't leave. If you move here, you won't leave. And I feel like that's not who we are or becoming, because a lot of people I know, their kids are graduating from college and they're not able to move back to Beverly because they simply can't afford to live here. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I want to see change. And what I was talking about before with, say, Linfield and how they did it was, okay, the companies that come here and that invest and that build here, they should be giving back something so that, or we should have something included so that it is going to create more equity here, so that people who live here, who from here, they can actually come back and still live here. Yeah. And I don't see that happening currently.
No, I see the same situation. I've got a granddaughter that's living with me. She's teaching in Reading, and it's exactly what you said. The cost of living any place on the North Shore is such that you have to have two incomes to afford even a modest apartment.
Yes.
And this gets into the issue of what do we do about zoning? And I had a discussion with one of the city councilors, I think it was Todd Rotundo, and he was mentioning that he and his brother started out with a duplex. Mm-hmm. And that, I don't know what the details, whether he owned it and his brother paid him rent, but he had two incomes essentially working on a mortgage. And triple deckers were the basic method on how you would develop wealth and get yourself some sort of living condition and have some income so that you could afford the mortgage. And yet the zoning seems to be pushing us in a different direction. So you have any thoughts on what would you like to do with the zoning laws that the city council controls?
Yes. So the zoning laws is something I haven't been very much included into at this point. So that'd be something that I'm growing into more. But I think we all know and understand from historically, zoning has been used to alienate some people, create zones here that are more profitable for others. And that's kind of where the term the wrong side of the tracks comes from, because you can easily be zoned where the neighborhood that you currently live in is no longer, there's no business coming through it and so forth. So those are all things and issues that we have to take a close look at and make sure that whatever we're zoning, it's going to be equitable to some degree. And it's going to allow us to hopefully create some zones where we can actually have housing where our students and our talent can come back and live here. And again, that's going to go to me, if companies are, we're having people coming in and building, part of that is we have to create, for the people that are already here in zones where, we can actually have housing that's affordable for people to live in so that they can start to grow and thrive in the city. The one thing that I loved about Beverly when I came here, I was like, there's a place for wherever you are economically in your life. If you were just starting out economically, there was a place in Beverly that you could live. If you were moving up and becoming, middle class, there was a place for you. If you happen to hit it and you were wealthy, there's a place in Beverly where you can move to as well. So you can literally spend your entire life just moving in different places of Beverly, wherever you are economically. And we're starting to see that's no longer the case. And like you said, zoning is going to be important going forward and how we address that.
I've had another city councilor mention exactly the same thing on one of these discussions. And she was essentially saying that the people are starting to add second and third floors to essentially bungalows, ranch houses for their elderly parents to live in, because you can't move any place around here and find a downsizing kind of situation that's not exorbitantly expensive. And it's the problem that if you want to have a complete city, you've got to have room for everybody. And it's not just a racial issue, it's an economic issue.
Exactly.
I think that's what Beverly is more involved with than I think anything else.
Yes, it's definitely an economic issue. Racially, economics hit harder, for, say, people of color. But I think, as I grew up, there was, people that were on the lower economic end, that were white, that were black, all races under the sun. And then the one thing that we were always able to do was to come together because you find yourself in the same situation where the color of your skin didn't matter. So that's what I'm looking at Beverly now. It's all of us coming together to address this situation because, economically, no matter the color of your skin, when you hit a certain economic tier and it's towards the bottom, life becomes a lot more difficult, a lot harder to manage. You can be a great human being, but without those resources, it becomes very difficult. And I don't want to see that become our city.
Yeah. Well, the example I keep using, I've done it on several shows, is I grew up in Providence just about the time that the situation politically was changing from the Irish running the city to the Italians. Mm-hmm. The one I really like is it all happened when John O. Pastore got elected governor. And it's O period Pastore, not O apostrophe. and that was the situation, that different ethnic groups were on the bottom end of the totem pole, and they eventually got together and made it economically, and somebody else moved in. And Providence being a little bit bigger city than Beverly, there were areas that were very definitely ethnically oriented. So it's the problem of how do you get the better jobs? And I think Beverly has been doing a nice job of bringing in a lot of companies. The shoe is a tremendous changing situation for the city. And the work they're doing on Dunham Road and the Cherry Hill, this is the kind of thing that's doing fine. But at the same time, I keep harping back on, it's nice to build these factories and bring in some decent paying jobs, but where are the people going to live to work there?
Yes.
So that's my hang up right now. But I guess the question is, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm not one of the contenders right now, and you are. So what would you like to change in the city?
Again, the biggest changes I like to see in the city are, as we move forward economically, like you were saying, we have to create an environment where we're giving back to the people that are here. So we have to create opportunities for our youth and their growth so that one day they can come back and actually live here in Beverly. So education is going to be paramount, how we address that. I work on a STEM board that's based out of Boston. It's a state STEM board. And one of the biggest things they're looking to address is to actually build tech school type programs where you can learn coding and other STEM based programs while you're still in elementary school, middle school. And once you get in high school, you can actually have internships in these programs with companies in Boston and Beverly and other places. And by the time you're done with high school, you can actually get at least low-level jobs within those companies. So then maybe your college is paid for, maybe you're able to forego college and you can start your career. And then all of a sudden you get that big economic boost up front instead of having to wait 5, 6 or more years of being, hundreds of $1,000s in debt before you can actually start your career. So that's one of the biggest things that I'm looking to accomplish for the city.
Well, that gets into one of my hot buttons too, that when I saw your first set of credentials show up in the paper at the big board STEM right there, I was sort of wishing you were running for the school committee instead. But there are things that I think they could be doing a lot better. And I think it's going to take some motivation from the city council to explain to the school committee, hey, if you're going to spend all of our money, you're going to spend it the way we want you to. And I would like to see things like drop calculus and start teaching linear algebra instead, because computers can't do calculus. They can do linear algebra very well. And it's the same thing as you mentioned with the coding. We ought to have a program whereby you can meet your foreign language requirements by taking a course in Python or one of the other computer languages. And there's a lot of things we could be doing. And one of the big problems we got in the city is there aren't enough spaces at Essex Tech for every kid that wants to go there. Mm-hmm. And when we built the high school and we built the middle school, why don't we have a trade school as part of them? And when we're talking trade school, it's not the old, hey, make a wooden stool for your family or something like that. It's a different technology. So anyway, I can go on quite some time. It's not my show, it's your show. So we're about run out of time. So any final words?
Yeah, real quick, if I could just address that real quick. I'd like to say, George, with there's many great people that are part of the school community. I've worked there as well. And I think, all of us working together, we can come up with some solutions. But like you said, we have to be focused on that. And I think if we can start to have those conversations, but start to move towards that, because now more than ever, I have a son that's over at the tech school also. But now more than ever, we have to provide opportunities where our kids, instead of just going to college, they can actually start generating income for themselves by the time they get out of high school. I think at this point, we're obligated to do things of that nature. And all of us working together, I fully believe that we can accomplish that.
Yeah. The other one I like is you can't outsource a plumbing job to India.
Exactly.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We've had an interesting discussion with Dominic Copeland, one of the contenders for the Ward 6. And hopefully you get picked. If not, I'd like to see you run at least for school committee, if not for the city council again. So we may have another show later on. And thanks again for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a different opinion on what you think the city ought to be doing, at the end of the credits, there's my name and my email address. Send me an email and we'll get you on the show. Good night, all.
Good night.